Howdy ho, friends and foes, and welcome to Dads on Life, your weekly episodic show about parenting from a male perspective. I'm your host, Jay Miles, and with me, as always, are my co-hosts, Keith Bogan.
Good morning, sir.
Doug Hamadike.
Present.
Chad Holloway.
Happy Sunday.
And our new co-host, Dave Dusenberry.
What's going on, everybody?
Today, we're going to be talking about transgenders in athletics and such. One story that became prevalent, I mean, there's a bunch of them, but one of them, it's more the exception than the rule. But a few years ago, a story broke in Texas, surprise, surprise, of Mac Beggs. Mac Beggs is a young man who wanted to wrestle the boys. Problem was, Texas high school athletics told him he couldn't. Why? Well, Mac was born a girl. And Texas athletics said that you wrestle as the gender you were assigned, not the gender you choose. So they made Mac wrestle the girls. Well, Mac won 2 state championships. Reluctantly. He wanted to wrestle boys the whole time. So basically, we're going to be talking about different other transgenders in athletics and such. Because there was actually a documentary that came out specifically about Mac a couple months ago that I came across on Disney Plus. And I mean, there's another story that I'll get to in a little bit of why they shouldn't sometimes be able to wrestle the gender they want or fight the gender they want to fight. Who wants to kick us off?
Well,
Don't everybody jump in one.
Don't everybody jump in at once there.
Yeah.
So I'm in a very interesting situation myself. All of you, and many of the people who are in our giant audience know that I am frequently with a traveling drum corps, and in our drum corps, we have the diversity of the United States like you wouldn't believe. If you can imagine the background, you can imagine the preference. It's here. And we fight very strongly to represent that. And it's not just Jersey Surf that I'm part of. It's also throughout the entire activity, nationwide, worldwide. It seems to be a good place for people who they're more accepted here than a lot of places, unfortunately, which is wonderful that we can do that. With that said, that's a very interesting topic. I'm not sure any of us are qualified to pontificate on it because it's also there's such a medical background to it. That individual who wanted to wrestle in the men's division wasn't looking for an advantage because they, as they were born as the female gender, would, from a medical perspective, come in weaker, if you will, at a disadvantage. Even with hormone therapy and what have you, it's when you go the other direction.
Right.
That's even controversial here. Even in this safe haven where there's quite a number of those people who have choose to be identified in a variety of genders here, it's still controversial. And there's still a lot of dissent even amongst people here, which is fascinating because this population represents much more of the diversity than you would normally have in this conversation. So it's wildfire. I have no personal experience with this myself, none. We've bantered about this in our house. My sons, who are now 23 and 20, that's for Dave's. I think Dave, you met my sons.
Yep.
And they don't have a solid answer on this one either. This is of all of the topics in the world of diversity that divide this country, this may be the toughest one for anybody.
Right.
I'm not sure I have anything to contribute on. I'd love to. I personally am one of those people who has to take a back seat and if someone says should they or shouldn't they, I'm like, I'm not qualified. I don't know how to answer that question.
Yeah.
And I think my sons respect that, even though They're very much because younger, very progressive, liberal, if you will. They want very much for everybody to do whatever it is they want, complete freedom. But even at their tender young ages, they're beginning to understand that there are times when it may not make sense.
Right.
But they haven't said the words yet. I can just see it in their eyes.
Yeah.
Well, and I would agree. I think it's a difficult case because, in my mind, the issues I wrestle with is, if we look at them biologically, XX and XY, if an XX goes against an XY, that, they're probably not going to do well. And I have probably less of a problem, but then then put in the performance enhancing drugs, which testosterone is one of those, right? So then what happens? But then if you go the other way, where you have an XY going against an XX, then you have a domination of the sport. And that's where I go, it isn't fair if somebody transitions that direction, I don't think, because the other piece is that men are biologically, and we're talking about we have two concepts at play here. We have the biologic concept, we have a biologic entity, and then we also have the subjective entity, right? And even if they transition, that changes around some things, but the biology in terms of chromosomes is still there. So you have the strength. Men have greater strength than women.
Absolutely.
So I mean, that the XY has greater strength than an XX. So there's issues around that as well, and it's something hard. Like I've seen without the transgender stuff being interjected, I've seen birth girls go against birth boys and do well, but that's at a younger age. I think there's developmental, because there's differences in terms of the developmental stages at different ages and those kinds of things as well. So it's a complicated question, and I guess the thing that perturbs me is seeing somebody who transitions from man to woman and dominates.
Yeah.
Those are the things that are a problem for me, a real problem.
So the way I look at it is, at least in terms of this case, right? So we're talking about an athlete that wants to be able to participate in a sport against other athletes of the same athletic caliber, I guess we could say, right? The thing with sports and athletics is in just about every sport that I can think of, there are a ton of actually quantifiable measurables amongst athletes that can be measured and compared, right?
Right.
If you take gender out of it, and you go strictly on the case of sports measurables, whether it's strength, agility, coordination, whatever measurables you want to put, right? So right now in wrestling, it's based on weight class, right? So two athletes of a comparable weight within a few pounds get matched up with each other and they wrestle. That doesn't factor in strength. That doesn't factor in technique or ability or anything like that. It's strictly weight. When you're dealing with cases where you have athletes that want to compete beyond their given birth gender, they have, whether it's, and to Chad's point, you can have female athletes kick the asses of male athletes. If a male athlete is not as technically sound, is not as strong, but maybe has the same weight, but the female athlete that he's against just trains like hell and does well, she has a reasonable chance of winning. And vice versa. You can have, it can go the other way around. So my gut says for a case like this, and again, deciding wrestling pair-ups based on athletic ability and measurables and taking out gender entirely is a very, very radical concept in sports. I understand that. I tend to think that presents the fairest way to address and resolve this issues, especially in separate cases like this. Like if you have the ability and your measurables stack up against the guys, then go wrestle the guys, because that's where you're going to get the fairest match.
Right. Right.
Well,
I can speak on that for a second. I'll get to my, so Doug, go ahead.
oh no, I mean, I did have comments on that, but really my whole thing was more or less how Keith took it, was that none of us, from my understanding, are going through anything similar to this. And I was really looking in the video and it didn't show it. And I started to look up more and more articles. And it really didn't give a sense of what the family or the parents or the grandparents in this situation are really going through, or how they're handling it, which now, like, a lot of what we're seeing in society today is being your true self.
Mhm.
And the whole idea of pushing your kids to be their true self. And with some of that, it's great, and we all want our kids to be happy and do what's best for our kids and all. But there's also a maturity level that needs to be
Right.
factored into that, and why we are parents and guiding our kids. So I kind of hit a wall on that as well. And I don't know if anybody else got more like into the family dynamic of it, because I didn't really get a real motivation either to like Mac's story. I think there was like a lot of, I mean, it was short, so there was a lot of like details or information that wasn't provided, because I guess it wasn't necessary to the message of the video of the movie, if we'll call it that, you know. And I guess then it comes down to, like I said, like motivation, and then the change towards the end of becoming more or less someone that just wants to promote and bring attention to the subject. So, yeah.
Okay. There's a couple of things in this. Chad, you mentioned the testosterone. What was gathered from there was the whole debate in Texas State Assembly and that about this. I think what was eventually decided. Now there were parents of who were concerned, who tried to stop Mac, and one of the things was the testosterone. It was, but somebody finally went back and looked and found something of the mention of therapeutic levels.
Yeah.
Mac was considered to be within therapeutic levels.
Mhm.
That's why Mac was eventually allowed to wrestle the girls. So it's the same thing in UFC. It's the same thing in USADA. USADA's program is, if you can prove you're using testosterone for therapeutic levels, you're given an exemption legally.
Yeah.
And it is the right thing to do, because there, over the last few years, there have been fighters who have gone, like, some of them to the point of suicide, almost, of depression and things like that. And they've found it to be low T being a major problem amongst some fighters.
Mhm.
So there's many more exemptions where they're allowed therapeutic levels. So that issue's kind of been resolved a little bit. As for Mac's story, there's a mention in the video in the very beginning of how a coach saved his life. Mac was severely depressed to the point of suicide. And the coach got him going, but got him into wrestling and got him it, but noticed it wasn't helping. So the coach kind of, finally, after a couple of sit downs, started to deduce that there was other things up with Mac that he wasn't ready to address. And then he finally addressed it to him. One of the first people he addressed it to was the coach of, this is not me. And the coach was one of his biggest supporters.
Yeah.
The grandmother is much more, his grandmother and his father are much more on board with the whole thing. They really kind of and have advocated for him and with him. And actually in the end, Mac ended up at Life University. He ended up with a scholarship there, which Life University is a school, a university, a certified university, started by a chiropractor from Pennsylvania. The school's in Georgia. And this guy kind of threw a ton of money into starting this university. It's accredited, and largely the scholarships that are given are stories like Matt.
That's cool.
Now, I do want to hit on one, and somebody mentioned strength and things like that. I will bring up one case of Fallon Fox. Fallon Fox is an MMA fighter who trans to a boy.
Yep.
Male. And wanted to fight the girls in MMA. UFC will not touch him at all. They won't even go near him. I believe his last fight, or the fight for that, her fight, he was boy trans to a girl. And wanted to fight the girls. His last fight, he fractured a girl's skull. So yeah, there definitely are times where this needs to seriously be looked at and addressed. And yeah. I mean, we know the Olympics with the weightlifter. Obviously, we know that story. Something like that, I'm a little less to kind of jump to. Oh no, she shouldn't. Fighting, wrestling, that's one thing. I mean, weightlifting, track and field, it can be analyzed, but we're seeing the examples we've seen. These athletes have kind of been shown that, yeah, in fact, I think the weightlifter didn't even place. There was a track athlete who didn't even make it to the Olympic trials, really. It's happening, but they're getting shown pretty easily that it may not work for them. But yeah, Fallon Fox is one, like I said, that's a major problem. Now, you also mentioned about skill level. I can attest that from, but again, younger age. This actually was an interesting dichotomy, because you look at high school, but there are, even in Old Bridge, there is one specifically girl that is highly talented, blows away the girls, and she has competed with the boys and done a little better than 500. She's probably won a few more than she's lost, but she has lost. She has faced her setbacks against the boys. And I mean, she won 3 state championships in girls wrestling, and a runner-up in her 4th year in high school, and is now going to Lock Haven University. And that's Gabby Miller, who is unbelievable. And there's actually a couple others that are coming through high school. One of them, her brother is a pretty high level wrestler, and she looks to be on the same track. Saji is her last name. If you get a chance to look up Tyler Saji, can't remember exactly what her sister's name is. And there's a few of them, and I will actually now mention, as she's standing here making faces at me, I will talk about Delaney for a second, and I can attest to it from her tournament season last year. I can just go from that, and mention a couple of her matches from the beginning to the end of the season. Her first few tournaments and first few matches, it was a very defensive, just trying to survive kind of situation. And then you got her in the last the second to last tournament, and then you could see the development. Then you got in the last tournament where she faced the girls and only lost to one girl who beat all three girls and pinned all three girls and a boy in a matter of a minute and 15 seconds. Think about it. There's 3 3-minute periods. She went through just a period and a quarter. That's what I said. There's three 1-minute periods. And this girl beat 3 of them in just over a period and a quarter. So 4 of them in a period and a quarter. She beat a boy too, pinned a boy in about 22 seconds or something like that. Delana lasted the longest, lasting 32 seconds, I believe. But and then her last match, clearly there was a boy she was wrestling that may have been possibly in his first match. I don't know. She pinned him in 12 seconds. So you can absolutely attest that even at the high school level, there are some girls who just go into a gym and tear it up, and at 125 pounds, they look like monsters. And then they go out and wrestle the boys and destroy them. So it is absolutely possible. And if you get them two completely evenly matched athletes, even factoring in strength, one of the biggest things you will eventually come into factoring is skill level.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that matters. I know from talking to people that I know that have done athletics or training or things like that, and even for me as a really poor athlete, fitness guy, but more on the music front, I really look forward to, like, in terms of playing music, I look forward to playing with people that are better than me, that can make me compete, that can make me really work for what I got going on. And I know that that's the same for athletics. So if you have a given athlete that has a given skill level, that really works hard at their craft, and they're constantly being put against competition that is not going to be up to par on their own, there are two things are going to happen. Either they're going to get a really huge head, or they're going to get bored. Like, that's what's going to happen. So the case of the athlete that you were talking about, transitioning, like basically just kicking all the girls' asses and then going just over 500 against the boys. I love that story, because that, I guarantee you, her mindset was, when she probably felt better about her matches going up against the boys, because they were making her work her skill level and her talent to really develop it. You don't develop it if you're just crushing everybody. You can get complacent or lazy. I think that's an awesome story. And that's somebody that I can see. Now, look, when it comes to athletics, high school athletics, the level of competition that comes into these things are really, really widespread. It narrows down considerably at the college level, and then really narrows down at the professional level, right? So that obviously factors in. You could have somebody the cream of the crop and just crushing everybody left, right, and sideways in the high school. They get to college and they're like, oh crap, everybody's this good. That happens. But I think that's why I think, using the level of comparing comparable skill levels or athletic abilities, and however you want to measure that, there's a number of different ways depending on the sport that you can measure that. And then factoring that in, and then going from there. The thing you're going to have to work out, especially in wrestling, is there is definitely a level of discomfort just based on what is required to execute the sport of wrestling and the grappling involved that may make some athletes uncomfortable going against somebody of a different gender. That's possible. There's a bit of grabbing going on. I think actual athletes that are in the moment don't really think about that. I think they think, this is my technique. This is what I need to do to win. This is what I'm going to do. And perhaps maybe the whole, uncomfortable with what's required to perform the thing is more on the parents and the observers rather than the actual athletes. The athletes don't care. They know what they have to do to win. It's no different if you're wrestling, whatever. These are the moves I have to do to win, and that's what I'm going to do.
Right, but I was gonna say, like, in the case of, like, Leah Thompson, the swimmer,
Yeah.
they were just saying that, the amount of, like, they had to bring in, like, people to speak to the team and explain to them how to deal with Leah Thomas, whatever, and,
Mhm.
so that brings in a whole other factor of, like, psychology and stuff, and
Sure,
how
absolutely.
and also just, locker room, um, like, things, and, how a lot of the swimmers are now coming out saying that they feel very uncomfortable, you know, and we all know that men's locker rooms are a lot different than women's locker rooms, and, and there's that whole, like, difference of, camaraderie and team building that is
Mhm.
a lot different. So there's a lot of, like, social issues that Dave touched on, and as well as, just, when we're talking about professional, high school, and then other sports that are not, like, so, like, restrictive, we got lots of different things going on here, and a lot of different, maturity levels, and a lot of different, contagions, like
Yep.
you're saying, between parents and just teens just being cruel to each other, like,
Yep.
Also,
so
obviously, where these happen, like Mac is in Texas. Would this happen? Would it have been a different situation? Obviously, it would have been a different situation in New Jersey or in Pennsylvania, or he may have been treated differently by his own peers as well. That's a very good point.
I will
Like
also,
here, I think,
yeah,
like here, I think he would have been fine. I don't think there would have been any
yeah,
kind of really.
yeah. Location matters. I'll also say that what we are discussing here with this case and the dynamics going on, social, athletic, and all of that stuff, everything that we're talking on is not unprecedented in this country.
Right.
I will guarantee you that folks like Jackie Robinson and Kurt Flood had very similar experiences to what's going on, where there was prejudice in the locker room, social stigmas, questioning athletic ability and whether or not they could compete with other athletes. Like, you have women in sports that are desperately trying to get onto NFL teams,
Mhm.
working really hard at it, whether it's in whatever skill level. Like what we're seeing now is not unprecedented. And I think that there are lessons that we can take away from prior breakthrough efforts in sports historically dominated by one type of individual, whether it's racial, whether it's gender or whatnot. I think there's a lot of lessons we can take away from those to apply to this. Now, look, in states that are a bit more open-minded, if we want to use the word literal or liberal, we can use the word liberal, whatever, doesn't matter. There may be a more open-mindedness to bringing them in and just letting athletics decide who's going to advance. There are some that are more conservative, that are like, I don't like change. Change is bad. We need to keep change out because I am very comfortable seeing what I'm seeing, and I don't want to see that balance upset.
Well, I mean,
Yeah.
you can. Well, we can start if you want. We can go down that rabbit hole too for a second. I mean, I don't think we're all older. We all probably know the story of Rielme, her last name was, the hockey goalie. I mean,
Yep.
we all know she was a big national, but she didn't exactly amount to anything. She was an
Yep.
okay goalie, but she got, and then Scott, I remember not controversies, but stories of Scott Gomez and things like that, who was one of the first, I think he was the first Hispanic hockey player or something like that.
Sure.
And there's been a bunch of them along the way. And the most recent case and it was an absolute disaster, and the only thing it was media attention pretty much for both her and NASCAR, was Danica Patrick crossing over to NASCAR.
Mhm.
Didn't doubt at all. She barely even finished a race, let alone even come close to winning one. So, and I mean, yeah, there's other controversies there as well. I don't want to go down that rabbit hole with NASCAR, but we all know the one story that came out a few years ago. But yeah, it's definitely there. There's the first, I believe she's the first president of football operations for the, not maybe she's the first GM of the Raiders.
Mhm.
Then the Raiders just hire not just a woman, but an African American woman.
Yep.
So that's a big, that was a big story there for a few minutes.
Don't forget about Carl Nassib on the Raiders as well.
Oh, absolutely. Carl Nassib, that's a very good one. Michael Sam.
Yep, Michael Sam
Who, when it came down to it,
was an okay player, not great,
mediocre, I would
mediocre.
say.
Yeah, yeah. But and that's the thing is that a lot of times when you have breakthrough athletics, look, somebody works really hard to aspire to break through that wall to get to that upper level. Sometimes when they get there, they're like, holy crap, this is really hard, and they don't do well. But
Right.
Just because the first person that's trying to do it doesn't do well, doesn't mean that others won't look at that example and see the level of work required to get there and match their efforts to build on that, to get to a place where they can compete with anybody else. It's happened in tons of other sports, in tons of other ways. And that's why I say, like, if we look at athletic measurables, I think that's a better gauge of figuring out what track or what path somebody can take on their athletic career.
I'll say last night, I'll speak for something that happened last night. A UFC fight last night between Julia Pena and Amanda Nunes. Nunes winning back her title. Well, now her title again. It was a absolutely amazing fight where Pena showed, incredible heart despite getting knocked down 3 times in the second round, actually almost tapping out Amanda Nunes a couple of times, of surviving. And I said to somebody, honestly, if there's a third fight, that's not just going to be the highest grossing and most watched women's fight in history. That's going to be probably top 5 all time of watched fights in UFC history. And it's a great thing that, well, in USC especially, with the amount of girls that are doing things like Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and judo and things and Aikido and things like that now, that's on the rise. I've seen it. I mean, there were a couple of them in Delana and Sabidi's Jiu-Jitsu school. Now there's a ton of them. I'm not going to say it's 50-50, but it's pretty close to 50-50. A lot of these classes, even adults, there's a lot more than there were when we first walked in there. There's probably about 6 or 7 now women that are doing this. There's some, believe there's one in the middle of the day that's ironically women and cops in Old Bridge. So it's happening and it's on the rise because of women like Amanda Nunes. But obviously, going back to, it's going to be very difficult to see a transgender make that jump. But when it does happen, it's most likely going to be a boy that was born a girl and makes the transition. And then it's going to, hopefully, if it happens, it turns UFC on its ear.
Yeah.
Because someone like Fallon Fox, that can't happen. They've got to, make the right decision if she's ever signed to UFC, and she's got to, fight who she probably should be fighting. So now, and I just started thinking when you brought up Jackie Robinson, and I'm sitting here thinking, could you imagine if Jackie Robinson would have failed?
Yeah, I know.
What would have happened then in 1950?
A lot of people have talked about it. A lot of people wanted him to fail. A lot of people wanted him to fail.
But it's irrelevant, as Dave pointed out, it's irrelevant whether or not he succeeded or failed. He broke the barrier.
Right.
Yeah.
If he hadn't done well, Larry Doby would have been right behind him.
Yep.
If he hadn't been done well, Elston Howard would have been right behind him.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly.
it's not
Basketball
the-
the same way.
You know, and
mean-
Michael Sam is a perfect example. He never even really played.
Yeah.
Carl Nassib played very little afterwards and disappeared fairly quickly afterwards.
Yep.
But his role in history, their role in history
didn't.
is important.
No, we didn't.
Carl Nassib was a spare part he was good for about 10 seconds after he made the announcement. Yeah, he didn't last for it. The
He's
point
still
is,
there.
he broke, if he's still around, where's he
He's
hiding?
still there. He's still on the Raiders. They just gave him a contract extension.
Is he like, the 53rd guy on the roster? Because he's not
No.
relevant at all. The point is, Michael Sam is the guy who broke the barrier.
Yeah.
But that was his role in history.
Yeah.
Jackie Robinson is a tremendous exception to the rule to break the barrier and actually be really good.
Yeah, and excel. Yeah, absolutely. I agree.
Yeah.
That's not something that you see a lot.
And
But,
when I heard,
I think we're really off topic here because Jackie Robinson broke the barrier in a sport where all men play, and where all men biologically are created equal, if you will.
Well,
Michael Sam did the same thing.
but keep in mind, that's what we think now. The thinking at the time was that black players were genetically inferior to
So
white players and
this is
couldn't
where I'm
compete on
gonna
that level.
sound,
So
I'm going to sound bad because I'm having a little trouble envisioning a time when someone who is born male and transitions to female is considered biologically equal, even if they transition to someone who's born female and remains that way.
Yeah.
In terms of physical strength.
Yeah.
In terms of all the other skills, yes, everybody's equal all along. But are you telling me that you envision a world where, in 25 years or even 5 years, where those people are considered equal? The people from those two different groups are considered equal.
The way I look at it is when I'm watching a given sporting event, whatever it is, baseball, wrestling, football, hockey, whatever, what I want to see is I want to see the best players play on those teams. And I want to see those best players compete against each other to see who wins. That's what I want to see. And I say player has no gender assigned to it. I want to see the best players who have worked hard through and come up, done their skills well, competed against people at all different levels. I want to see the cream of the crop come up and get an opportunity to battle against each other and compete. That's as a sports guy, ultimately that's what I want to see because I think that gives us the best competition.
So let me throw in there, and again, I'm not establishing a position here, but this is what I think I see, and that is, I watch, for instance, women's basketball. I'm a big fan of it. My son goes to the University of South Carolina, and our team is the national champions.
Mhm.
There isn't a player on the national championship Gamecock squad that could play in the NBA.
Mhm.
They would get destroyed.
Yep.
I mean, it wouldn't even be like, well, they'd be like the 12th player. They wouldn't even be the 50th player on any NBA team.
Right.
And that goes for Aaliyah Boston, who is National Player of the Year.
Mhm.
She would get wrecked. So with all of what we're seeing is someone who's born with the genetics of a man, even when they transition, still has the genetics of a man. How does it make sense that we're not seeing the best of the best in that case. We're seeing all the great female players and then someone who could be whatever, poor, medium, great in the men's division come in and the whole case of the Texas wrestler is a prime example. That person, many people would think has an unfair advantage because they were born with genetically greater strength. And I say this listening to myself, and I'm thinking to myself,
No, dropped it.
the words of Al Campanis ring through my head. And Dave's obviously a big baseball fan, so he knows what I'm talking about. The very first person to get his ass thrown out of professional sports was for saying something racially stupid.
Yep.
Was Al Campanis. who was the general manager or after Brian Tricky, I guess, of the Dodgers. Who literally came out in public, talked about Black people being genetically enhanced and better, more muscular and more suited to be athletes, bigger, stronger, faster, all that sort of thing. And so I'm listening to myself say almost the same things that Al Campana said, but I'm saying it about different genders. And I'm sure at the time that Al Campana said what he said, it made perfect sense to him.
Yep, absolutely. Context matters.
Yeah, right. So I'm sitting here thinking, am I going to regret my words in 10 years?
Well, I do want to correct you. You got the switched on Mac. Mac was a girl trans to a boy. So you got that switched. You
That's okay.
said genetically.
Yeah, I told you I didn't have a chance to do the research. Whatever.
The other way around. He was a girl trans to a boy. He was weaker.
Well,
So
but didn't that person then go on to compete against the girls?
Because they had to.
They had to. They were forced by Texas. Well, right. I do want to mention one thing of this being in Texas. I have a feeling there might have been a certain mentality of Texas had other reasons of not wanting to have Mac wrestle the boys. In their eyes, the boys getting their ass kicked by a girl.
Oh yeah. Oh, perception absolutely factors into that. Absolutely it does. So Keith, I think you bring up a good point, and I'll throw something out at you. We say you have a given athlete, born a boy, transitions to a girl. Is that athlete eligible after that point to compete with the boys?
So this is the biased viewpoint that many people would have. And I'm going to say it without necessarily saying that I support it or don't support it.
Okay.
Most people think that any girl should be able to participate in any girl's sport or any boy's sport because they feel as though the boys have the advantage from the strength perspective. So why not let them try to compete? And we're all sitting here begging for somebody to break the barrier, break some female to play baseball on a professional, to play football, to play basketball. Just one who could just stand out and actually, be in the sport. And it hasn't happened yet, but I'm hopeful. I'm very hopeful that it'll happen. But I don't know that many people who are praying for it the other way around. I don't know anybody who would want to see a talented men's basketball player play in the women's division. Mm-hmm. I don't know anybody who would want to see a talented men's softball player play in the women's division.
And that's a great point, actually. That's a really good point, because there are plenty of men, I'm sure, that have the skill level that would match playing on the women's circuit. That's a really, really good point. Really good point.
Although I could actually see that because of the bias of our society, I could see that happening first. Because this is the white male dominates the society, even though it doesn't deserve to. I could see a world where the breakthrough happens in that direction, where men are allowed to play in women's sports before women are allowed to play in men's sports. Yes, white men are full of shit, and I'm one of them.
So, go ahead, Doug.
No, I just was going to say, once again, we're talking about different regulations for different types of levels of professionalism. And, like we were just saying the difference between professional sports versus college sports and what you can regulate, what you can't, and who goes into those factors and all. Because like I was saying with the case with Leah Thompson, the swimmer, and just all the difficulties there. And, it's just a very tricky thing on multiple levels, titles, when he was competing as a man where he was competing as a woman, strength levels, locker room issues, team squad issues. And a lot of this stuff that we're talking about can be regulated, which mostly is a lot of the things that you are talking about on skill levels. And then there's a lot of things that on a social level that you can't. And, and it just makes it a very difficult thing. And what you're talking about, well, what we're talking about with Mac is very different, because now we're talking about rules of a school, which can be very regulated and restrictive, you know, and we're talking about making a change for, you know, a whole group of youth. And what factors into that is a lot different than the things that factor in as professionalism, you know. And it's just part of all this conversation is also just defining, like, what do we mean by a lot of these words and language that we use, which, you know, is also a very difficult thing.
I got to throw in on that for just a second, because you said something earlier, Doug, that I was, thank God I was on mute because I was laughing so hard. Most of the women athletes that I have spoken to over time would dispute your viewpoint that the locker room behavior is dramatically different between genders. In fact, most of the women athletes I've spoken to would say that what happens in the women's locker room would make all of us blush and hide our heads under towels. So let's not think that we own the market on sexual innuendo,
I
and all that sort of thing. Oh no, they put it in the shade many times.
Different. Yeah. I mean, you know, it's very different the way that men talk to men versus you know, versus women who talk to women.
Have you ever been in a women's locker room? I would suggest that you might be in error there.
I'm just saying that I know the way that that a lot of men talk amongst themselves are not the way that they would talk in front of their wife. You
right,
know,
and women are the same way. They will talk in ways that you would not do in Catholic school, in locker rooms. But once the men are around, they think they're supposed to behave a certain way, and it all goes away. Yes,
I think
both genders are like that.
I would also note that what I mentioned actually was what the women from Leah's team actually said. Like, part of their conversation that was documented in news articles that came out in the past 2 weeks. So,
well, and I think that's a whole different dynamic too. If you look at the difference between men's and women's locker room, and then you add, you know, Leah to the mix in the women's locker room, and she comes up and smacks a girl on the butt after a good game. Does that have the same meaning as a woman who did that in the same locker room? I think that's kind of what you're getting at, Doug, isn't it? With some of that?
Yeah. Well, yeah, all of it. Yeah, I think it's all very important. And they were also, well, also people were sharing that, just, you know, genitalia and all get into it. And I mean, there's ways around that, but I just mean that right where we are right now with the articles that I was reading, trying to follow up on the subject, these are some of the things that were pointed out.
So anyway, going back to what we were on here, is the whole thing, it's really unresolved in Texas. There's been no change to the rule itself. You still have to wrestle the gender you were assigned, but in Mac's case, it's not an exemption. They did put, you know, they tried to bring a bill up to ban him from competing in competition at all. That was, and then he's filed a lawsuit. They passed it through one part, but it never even was brought up as a vote in the other. The lawsuit was dropped. Mac was allowed to wrestle. So I mean, but we still sit here now. This is also 5 years later. This whole thing started 5 years ago. Mac is 23 years old now. So it hasn't changed. None of it's really changed. He, like I said, he was allowed to compete, but it's still, like I said, in other states, changes have been made like this. That will, you know, they saw Mac's story and they kind of went, oh, yeah, you know, if he wants to compete against the boys, we're going to let him. So Texas has probably obviously. Texas is the exception in a lot of these cases.
I'm sorry, you said Texas and change in the same sentence. Those two don't go together.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's why
Yeah.
I said Texas. Texas is the exemption instead of is the exemption to the rule in a lot of cases. But yeah, Mac, and now Mac, I believe, is competing against the boys at this point. In the university that he's in, not sure what division Life University is, but he is competing still. He did not make the Olympic. He actually, sorry, made the Olympic team, was kicked off the Olympic team for missing, and it was legit. He was missing. He had missed a couple of practices for certain things over the course of the last couple of years, and that was in. It was a Texas team that he was on. He was kicked off of that team, and I believe he's trying to make the team in Georgia still now, but with being in college, it's been a little bit difficult over the last few years. But I have a feeling there's other realms of sports you may see Mac's name turn up in. I have a feeling you may see someone like Mac maybe making a transition into WWE. I think that's a possibility if you wanted to take that route. There's one I know in AEW. There's one that trans to a girl from a boy. There's a couple of them. That's another, it's not about should they compete, but there's if you see some of the things that have been said about her name is Nyla Rose in AEW, you may want to check that story out. I probably should have pointed that out to you of the hate that she's gotten.
Oh yeah.
For being some of it is being transgender. Some of it is legit because she sucks in the ring. She's terrible and is almost is an injury waiting to happen for somebody in a lot of the cases. So, but that honestly has nothing to do with, her, with her skill level.
Yeah.
So,
listen, there's a big difference between
no,
entertainment that's scripted, an activity that's scripted for entertainment versus genuine competition.
Agreed.
but
So to bring up WWE, that's just bringing in anyone they can bring in to draw an audience, but that's not for competition purposes.
right, but you still have to know what you're doing. You still have to be trained, because if you're not, guess what happens? You could kill somebody.
I totally get that, but in the end, the winner is decided before the event. It depends on what the ratings are going to be. So, and listen, anyone can develop the skill set of technique and understanding the process. I could go in there and develop the technique. I would probably have killed anyway because of my physique. But if you work out and if you're in reasonably good shape, very good shape the way these wrestlers are, I'm not saying that they're not in outstanding athletes. Most of them are in very good shape.
Artificially good shape, I would say.
Yes.
I would say Brock Lesnar.
There's that too. There's, and that's not necessarily regulated either, but it's all about entertainment dollars. It's a completely different comparative. When you're talking about professional athletes who are genuinely competing against each other, whether in team or individual sports, that to me, that's what this conversation's about.
Yeah. You have a couple factors here. So obviously, with this case, you have the athletic competition portion of it, right? Which I think we've discussed pretty well and whatnot. You also have the much harder to quantify and much harder to address because of diverse views on it, the social aspect of it, right? So that's something that, because of the way our country is going to be extremely difficult to find anything regarding consensus on. We are a country that has very differing views based on our geography and where we come from on a number of different issues, some of which haven't been resolved for over 200 years. There's some epic level ignorance on certain issues and stuff like that in our country all over the place, and they're very slow to change.
Sure.
Keith, I think your point is Texas and change should never go together.
Right.
I think that's very valid. So if Mac had grown up in, say, Connecticut and had his case, I guarantee you it would have gotten a much friendlier or a much more, I don't want to say reasonable, even though I should say reasonable. I think it would have been a much smoother process to be able to move to the type of competition that he was eligible to wrestle against. Yes, this is Texas. If this happened in Mississippi, if this happened in Wyoming, we'd see something very similar to what's going on now. And that's just the nature of the state's perception on it. And I think us, especially for most of us, I think Chad, the only real exception, most of us being where we are in our area, it could potentially skew our perception of what this case, quote unquote, should be. I think that matters.
I will make one point.
Okay.
Of, let's say, here and Delaware. Okay. Yeah, I don't know if you'll see where I'm going with this in a second. All right. If Mac was born here, there would be a little bit of a difference.
Quite a bit,
If
I would
Mac
say.
was born south of 195, be a very different story as if he was born north of 195.
Mhm.
You go into Monmouth County, you go into Ocean County, you're going to get a hell of a different reaction to the whole story in Middlesex County or in Essex County or in Union County.
Yep.
You go to Delaware, you're going to get a hell of a different reaction north of Dover and more east towards the what they call slower lower Delaware, the eastern shores of Delaware, as opposed to if you go near Harrington, you go near Sandy Folk, you go near some of the other towns, Laurel, some of the towns on the western side of Delaware. You're going to get a hell of a different reaction.
If I can make it easier for you, Jason, you're going to get a bit better, different reaction if you go near population centers, versus whether you go out in the sticks.
And it makes sense because population centers, by their very nature, due to the number of people in them, hence why they're called population centers, there's a much bigger diversity of people in large population centers. And with that large number of people comes a lot more diverse opinions. And when everybody has to live close to each other, you kind of have to work some things out just in order to function and get along. Whereas places that are more sparse population, you can have more siloed thinking because you're not dealing with as many people and as many viewpoints, that makes complete sense.
It's why California, if you look at it geographically, is 2/3 Republican.
Yeah.
It's 2/3 very conservative. And in fact, there has been occasional referendums in that state to separate it into 3 different states.
Yep.
Because of such diverse thinking. But
Up
most
North
of
California, fantastic case.
2/3 of that state is very light in population.
Yeah.
And that's the 2/3 that would be conservative.
Right. You go near LA, you go near San Diego, you go near San Francisco, you got a very different reaction than you go near the Nevada border. You're absolutely 100% right.
New York,
or
New
North
York is
Oregon border.
the city of New York and all of its boroughs and outlying, cities, is decidedly liberal. Upstate is absolutely red. Absolutely. And that's anything above Westchester County.
Mhm.
Anything.
Absolutely. Totally agree with you.
Where people gather, there is progress. Where people are outnumbered by the cows, there is not.
I wonder, and it's interesting because, so with the Mac case, I wonder what the situation would have been if Mac were based in Austin. Austin is probably the one kind of liberal stanchion of all of Texas.
Well, San Antonio.
Well,
San
yeah,
Antonio.
San Antonio, I suppose, but I mean, really, Austin's the big one there.
Mhm.
Now again, Texas state law would have still factored in regardless, but I think he might have had an easier time of at least some things on the local portion of it and within the higher density population centers like Austin or San Antonio. So yeah, geographic location matters.
Right.
And I don't know. For me, it comes down to having the best athlete compete at the best level. I
Right.
mean, I honestly think it's that simple
Sure,
for me.
it should be.
It should be. It's really easy. But people are gonna have reservations.
Yes, but so most people would say to you, the best level is the men's level.
Well, that's subjective. That's subjective based on the athlete. Some athletes are never going to get to that level. Best is an awesome word, but again, best is a word that has different meaning to different people at different times.
Right.
It's really contingent on the path and the abilities of the given individual on where they get to. Like for me, when it comes to playing music, I'm not good enough to tour with Iron Maiden, right? I've been playing bass for 30 something years. I'm not good enough to tour with Iron Maiden. That guy's ridiculous. So for me, best, could be, the music that I'm making now, or getting with other bands that are, that maybe play slightly better to get me to up my game. Athletics is no different. Athletics is putting a given athlete in subjectively the best pairing or situation or team or level so that they can compete and work hard and hopefully improve at the same time so that they can go up from there.
I have to vehemently disagree, and I don't usually do that because, Dave, I think your opinions are fabulous. I don't think you can compare a non-contact event like playing musical instruments and performing in a musical setting to contact physical sports.
Okay, that's fair.
That's fair. That's the only time I thought, no, I got to say something. I'm
okay.
100%, 98% lockstep with what you're saying. You and I really agree on almost everything that comes out. I'm sure there's some things I've said that you probably disagree with too, but but that one, he does, and Jason's going to be pissed when I say this, but you brought up NASCAR. I don't know why. I thought we were talking about sports here. Sorry. I mean, sorry. I just no. It's a ridiculous comparative. It just it's fun to watch, but it's not a sport. So anyway,
That's how I'm in the show. I'm just gonna sit here like this for the next 10 minutes.
Hi, Linda.
I think that's actually because now I'm looking, I'm like, oh, we went through an hour pretty quickly here. I know Keith has to go surprise his kids.
One of them still doesn't know I'm here, and I've been here since 11:30 last night.
That's awesome.
Anybody have anything they want to add before we head out of here? Chad, you were very quiet today.
Yeah. I kind of said what I had to say up front, and like to Keith's point, it's like I don't have much to contribute. I do see, kind of my perspective is a double standard on it. I think that the males transitioning to females can create a level of unfairness, and that that's kind of where my whole thing is. But females transitioning to males, I think it's tough, and there's questions to wrestle with there. But with testosterone and those things, but it's a little more on the fair side. And the other thing I want to say is that earlier we had talked a bit about Jackie Robinson and transitioning in there. My recollection of the story of him was that the owners, when they were picking the players to go, that he was not the best player. Actually, he was a player they thought could integrate with them, and he wouldn't like blow up and fight and those kinds of things. So it was kind of he was kind of the trailblazer, but they also looked at some of the social aspects of it as well, because they wanted it to work, and they had to find a personality that was going to fit with that and could take a little bit and could give a little bit and could
take a lot.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly. But could eventually make it work and make the team integrated. So
Yeah.
I mean, there is that part of it, I think, in this, which you guys had alluded to as well, which I think is an important part. And when you got and it's a lot different because, you know, now you're mixing up the genders, and you got the, you know, we talked a little bit about the locker rooms and how things go there and how people feel about that. And, you know, there's some other things there, but it's transitioning, not only just the level of talent, but also socially transitioning into something like that.
There has to be. So I didn't even think of this until you brought that up, Chad. That's a good point with the Jackie story. I mean, if anybody hasn't seen the Chadwick Boseman, Jackie Robinson movie, watch it because it's freaking awesome. It's ridiculously good, right? But they're actually, like, looking at that case, it's not just about, I mean, I've been talking about athletics, that athletics should be even in that particular case. And I think, again, something that we should learn from history, there was quite a bit of marketing involved in that choice.
Mm-hmm.
There was a lot of marketing involved. That was a conscious effort on the part of Dodger management to find a person that could not only perform well, could play well, but could also address these social concerns. And that was the marketing portion of it. We need to find somebody that can, quote unquote, represent this new element coming in and not be what everybody thought of at the time, either a thug or violent or quick to react, even though that person had every right and every reason to, considering the amount of crap that they went through.
Or mentally unstable.
Yeah,
exactly. You all know who we're talking about.
Yeah.
If you know anything about baseball, you know who we're kind of making reference to.
Yeah. No, and I think that's a really good point, because anytime that you're talking about drastic change in a given environment, I think you want to be able to do it in a way that can not only perform well on the field, but can sell well off the field.
Mm-hmm. Yep. I agree.
I
think that's Keith, go ahead.
One thing I wanted to add, and that is, I'm the oldest guy in the group. I grew up in Lily White, Homedale. I didn't go to school with a black person until I was in high school. I did not know the meaning of the term gay until I was in high school. And I did not spend any time with anyone who was openly gay until I was in college. That doesn't mean that I'm racist or biased or anything like that, but I was raised in an environment that had a lot more of it in it than I care to admit. So in some ways, I've had to overcome some built-in biases of my own. And every generation grows up with certain things and then learns what things are right and wrong, and you have to overcome what is instinctive to you, what's built into your psyche from when you're a kid. I hope that without losing my job at some point, that I am Al Campanus. That the bias that you're clearly hearing in my voice, that I feel, I know instinctively it's bias, but I don't know how to overcome it yet. I don't know the path to getting past it, but I hope that what I said earlier in this conversation is viewed the same way, that we can almost ridicule what I said in 10 or 20 years, or preferably 1 year or sooner. There's got to be a path to figuring this out. I don't know what it is, but I'm sure Al Campanus did not know the path either. Even after he was called out, even after he lost his job, even after he recognized that what he said was technically wrong, he still in his mind couldn't understand it. And I'm not there yet either. So I am hopeful that that path becomes much clearer very soon.
That's very, very well said, man. I love it. Awesome.
Thank you.
I think that's a pretty good place to leave us for this week. This is something that's not going away anytime soon, I don't believe. And I got a feeling there's going to be more cases we're going to hear about in the coming months and weeks and years. The more things change, the more they stay the same, unfortunately. So from all of us here at Dads on Life, take care, everybody. And Keith, eat my shorts.
Chomp, chomp, buddy, chomp, chomp.
Godspeed.
Have a good